Good evening, fellow researchers. Someone show me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay. Can you hear me? Thanks, Sarah. Welcome back to EDL 740 Zoom session for week 4. We are halfway home. It's almost like a forced march, isn't it? A couple of reminders and a few comments from me as usual. And then I'll entertain your questions if you have them. Reminders are this. In week 7, please remember that we will not have a Zoom session, but you will have a final exam in that week. And then also the difference in week 7 will be that your submission deadlines for your learning tasks is on Saturday evening instead of Sunday evening that week. Those Dad Burns APA citations. I know you all are going to love me for those. As I told you last week, I am not an APA citation purist, but I want you to get in the habit of using those things correctly, and here's why. It's only right and respectful that we give appropriate credit to the creators of the content that we're learning from. And it's also only appropriately respectful and right that we leave a very clear breadcrumb trail for other learners like ourselves that want to get to and examine those same sources. So I'm going to keep pecking at you. Some of you realized a light sting from me this week because I reduced grades for the wrong citations. And I keep pitching the same recipe at you, and that recipe is the following. Those APA citations, and if you read the APA citation manual, it's a whole book about that stuff, but I'm not near as technical as they are. But here's the main thing. You always start with who created the content, the person or persons, not the entity. Occasionally, you'll come across an entity. We have this in week 4, where you cannot find a person responsible for creating the content. All you can find is the entity. Occasionally, that happens. The second item in that recipe is when. What year was the content created? The third piece in the recipe is what. What is the title of that article, that video, that book chapter, that journal article heading, whatever. The title of the content is what goes there. Perhaps it's a podcast. And then finally, at the tail end, is the where. And the where is where did you find it and where can other learners find that? Now, some of the content, and some of you have begun to figure this out. If you're reading the content from the hard copy source, then the where will state probably the publisher or the title of the journal in which the article might be found. If you're reading it online, then all you do is paste the URL that you retrieved it at. You say retrieved at www. or http. Usually, most of them say https : / so on and so forth. You get the idea. Now, here's my deal with you. Because I've been grading through those things, and I've been deducting a point for those of you that have been missing it during this week. I'm willing to give that point back to you, but you're going to have to work for it a little bit. If you lost a point as a result of that, and you would like it back, send me an email and say, in Learning Task 3.1, I lost a point for a wrong APA citation. Here's the correct one. And if you'll put that in your email, I'll give your point back to you, and we'll go on and be happy campers from there. Moving on, we got more important stuff to talk about. Many of you seem to have an affinity for that concept earlier last week when we saw it in our content about the importance of teaching our students, instead of teaching them what to think, the importance of teaching them how to think. And absolutely that is the case. I want to push your thinking just a little further than that, though, because all of us are in grad school. Some of us are in leadership development program, and some of us are in the C&I program, but all of us are school leaders, whatever role pathway you're taking. And so we have to work from the assumption that you and I, not only are we involved in teaching our children, and yes, principals teach children as well, but we're also become more and increasingly the teachers of adults. And not only is it important for us to be thinking in terms of teaching how to think from that perspective, it's important for us to, I want to go one step further and invite you to consider the possibility that you and I have a responsibility to help the adults that we work with and that we are teaching to develop the habits of mind, the habits of critical and collective thinking that will best contribute to the improvement of our schools and make better futures for our children. And yes, those ways of thinking, those habits of thinking critically and thinking collectively and collaboratively, they are habits. That's stuff that can actually be built into the way we work on a day-to-day basis. Those of you that have had the PLC class with me have already heard my blathering on that topic. Perhaps some of the others of you will be taking that class with me from the future. Along those lines, I have tried to design this course and the other ones I teach with that stuff in mind. I've taken a very andragogical and heutagogical approach to trying to design the course for you, and not so much pedagogical. And if you want to hear more about that one of these days, you can ping me or ask me on the side, and I'll give you a little explanation on that. But bottom line is this. I think you and I as adults and the adults that we work with learn much better, attend much better, are more highly engaged in the learning with us if the learning is designed from the perspective of we're in this together. What do we need to learn? How do we need to learn it? How are we going to go about it? Instead of here's what you have to learn and here's how I'm going to, a compliance-based model, basically. I think we have to move away from that as adult teachers of adults, and we have to move much more to a collaborative, shared responsibility for the learning with the adults. Amy and I were chatting about the topic of research during this week, and she brought out the point that I want to reinforce with you, that in research and in some of the studies that you're seeing, you see the researchers reference this. You can find a very high correlation between two variables when you're doing a study. It does not mean that one causes the other. Correlation does not mean causation. And so that's one of the challenges that researchers have when they're trying to tease out the data and tease out what the data means, because it's sometimes we want to jump to the conclusion that if there's a high correlation between two variables, then one can be assumed that the other is causing the other one, and which is not the case. Let's jump to the research mining work that you've been doing. Some of you have gotten a little ding from me on this too. I don't want you looking for and analyzing and overviewing for me blog posts. I'm not interested in scholarly articles. I love reading them. I'm not interested in you giving me summaries of book reports. What I'm interested in you on the research mining, learning task 4 and learning task 5, is actually looking at research studies, real studies. By the way, if you heard a gun in the background, you did. Last week I beamed up to you from a community between my home and Lubbock. Today I'm in the parking lot of a district track meet in which my oldest granddaughter is running. So you heard the starting pistol. I'm not in a drive-by shooting situation whatsoever. Let's go back to the research mining conversation. It seems to be getting easier for most of you, and I think it will continue to do so. I suspect a fair number of you are using our collective learning repository to go peek at where some of your classmates have been finding articles. That's a very wise pathway to take, by the way. And I'll say this too about APA citations. Those collective learning repositories are a great way for you to go back in and look and take a look at the way your classmates are citing those articles and videos and podcasts, whatever other things I'm throwing at you. Molly found in the research mining that one of the studies that she looked at had a sample size of almost 9 million. That's I don't remember ever seeing a study with that kind of sample size. That's kind of amazing. Again, on the research mining topic, quite a lot of the studies are designed to test, and some of you are coming across this. The study is designed to test the efficacy of a specific product or a particular model. So a lot of us professor types are, much of our work is thinking about how to improve our profession and how to improve outcomes for students. So we come up with this theoretical model that we think makes sense and has application possibilities. So we'll design a study around that, and we'll ask a school or a school district or a group of schools to apply that model, and then we see how well it worked and see if there's some efficacy there. And if so, then we try to spread that knowledge, and in a true capitalistic fashion, many times we're in there to see if we can monetize that thing and see if we can make money off of it at the same time. You will also see studies designed around intervention softwares, or perhaps like many of you have referenced being in schools that are using the Leader in Me model. And all of that stuff is a conceptual framework, or a conceptual way of doing business that someone has tied a trademark to, and they claim to own the intellectual property rights for that. And so they're trying to make money off of it, but they can make more money off of it if they can prove that it works. And so you're finding studies along those lines. That's the normal way of business, and it really doesn't matter whether we're talking education or pharmaceuticals or defense weapons. It doesn't matter what field that you're talking about. That same kind of thing is going on. And some of you have noted also that you're coming across some crappy studies. Of course you are, and that would happen in any field as well. Another comment about studies, as you think about the proposal that I'm asking you to craft in relation to your final exam, and I'm pitching questions at you about that. Occasionally, some of you are running across studies that you're examining in which they did a pilot study before they actually launched the study. And that's not a bad idea for researchers, especially if you're plowing in some ground that doesn't have a lot of previous research in it. It's not a bad idea to take a smaller sample set, test your question, test out your data collection ideas, and see if you think that data collection and the results you're getting are worthy and enough to inform the study and inform the profession in general. And you'll see that pretty often. The researchers will run a pilot study and they'll say, you know, we think we got something here, so now we're gonna expand it and go for a larger sample set. Very common technique. On the discussion forum teas that I gave to you all on the wait what, Lisa noted difficulty getting to constructive, how difficult it is, man. Lisa noted how difficult it is getting to constructive dialogue and genuine, unbiased investigations to find the truth in the current social and communications context. And I could not agree with Lisa more. It's another reason that disciplined minds are needed. I'll speak to that in a few minutes when I give you some book recommendations. On the wait what post also, pausing long enough to consider something different from our own thinking, our own mindset, can be very informative and growth producing. It's always helpful for you and me, as smart as we are. We're all graduate students or graduate degree holders, so clearly we're smart. But it's always important for us to make the assumption that we could be wrong or that we could be missing something important. And it takes a very disciplined mind to come to the conclusion and be willing to think that maybe I am wrong. Maybe I need to think of this in a different way or consider the other perspective. There is, let me get my notes straightened out here. I apologize. On the Tool Talk discussion prompt, many of your research questions are aimed at tracking change over time in some way, which is very typical for research. Maybe you're chasing ways to reduce discipline referrals on your campus, or maybe you're interested in studying improvements in student achievement, or maybe you're interested in improving teacher retention, or whatever it is. But one of the fundamental questions that you have to address as a researcher is this. Is this going to be a longitudinal study? In other words, is it going to be a study of the very same sample set before and after, which we call a longitudinal? You're taking the very same group and you're applying an intervention or a set of questions or a survey to them, and then you try something with them, and then you've given them the exact same post-test, if that's the way you want to think of it, to see if your intervention or your concept worked. That's called a longitudinal study, where you take the exact same sample, the same cohort, and you test them multiple times over time. Those take a little time to pull off, but they're very helpful. And usually they reduce the number of limitations that you have to discuss in your study because you're taking the exact same group. The other pathway that we're left with is when we're doing a comparative study. When we take two samples, and we see this most often in the hard sciences, and particularly the drug business, where we take a control group that we don't do anything with. We just keep doing business as usual with them. And then we take this other group, this other sample set, and we apply our intervention or our idea, or we try our software product or whatever, our theoretical model. And then we compare those groups to see if our ideas or our concept are working. It's another good model. It has some obvious, I think, limitations to it, because anytime you're taking a look at two different groups, as hard as you try to homogenize those groups, you're going to get some kinds of variance between those, which you have to articulate in your findings, and we list those as in the limitations part of the study. But we have to be very straightforward with, this is something that we really can't control. On that topic, for those of you that are very interested in the quantitative research, which is what you're studying this week, there's almost always control groups, and you're looking for the variables. You got the independent variable and the dependent variable. If I raise this, what happens to this? Does it go up or down? Or if I lower this, does this other variable go up or down? And so when you're doing those kinds of studies, you have to be very, very careful and mind the ethical issues as well. And occasionally, particularly in drug studies, we'll see a study launched on a new drug of some kind or another, and yeah, it may be making the blood pressure go down, but we're experiencing several thousand people dying as a result of the drug. And you'll see and you'll read sometimes that the researchers said, we just pulled the plug on it, because even if it's producing some good, it's not worth the loss of lives. We usually don't run in that in the education research business. It's not quite that life and death. We're thinking in terms of raising citizens and and decent human beings over time. So the social sciences normally don't have that sort of life and death consideration attached to the studies. But I think you get the idea. On the data collection, and that's what I asked you about in the discussion prompt that you received this morning. I want you to think carefully about, you have to think carefully about, if you're going to conduct a study, you got to figure out, okay, who am I going to question, or who's going to get the survey? How am I going to get it to them? Or how am I going to test this intervention? Or if you're talking on student performance, you know, is my math intervention idea going to work, or is it not? You have to have some way to get access to the previous performance of those children, so you can measure to see if your intervention was helpful or not. So the data collection is a pretty tricky deal, and access is not the least of the problems that you have to worry about. But I wanted, through that prompt, I wanted you all to think a little more deeply about that, to see if you could figure out if you could actually take a look at the question you ask. And some of you, as you can see in the discussion prompts, in the discussion responses, many of you are changing your question, but mostly because I think you realize that your first question was so dadgum broad that even if you collected a lot of data on it, the question was so broad that you would have a hard time making sense of that data. A very narrow question over a very narrow sliver of a conceptual inquiry is the best way to be able to collect some data that you can actually hang your hat on, that you feel like you can actually say, I think this intervention or this technique or this model was the cause of this change in performance or thinking or efficacy of the environment. Monica noted that in her school, administrators tend to use quantitative data more with students and qualitative data more with adults. You know, Monica, I had never really thought about that, and I think that's consistent with my experience too. Thank you for teasing my brain. I'd never thought of it quite like that. Kaya and Maria Louise, I apologize, Kaya, if I'm mispronouncing your name. Both of you astutely drew our attention to the who we might let conduct research in our district or on our campus. And that, for those of you, particularly those of you headed into administrative roles, that you're going to get those questions pitched at you. You're going to get requests from researchers that would like to conduct a study either in your school district or on your campus. If you work in a larger district, in all likelihood, there are already policies in place to deal with that. But if you work in mid-size or smaller districts or perhaps charter schools, I would be surprised if you already have a policy in place. So you can prepare yourself to think about, okay, who am I going to let come in and do qualitative study with my teachers? Or would I be willing to let this group that's trying out this new software on let's say, science interventions for low socioeconomic students, am I going to let them come into my building and conduct this research or not? And I think you can see there's some real ethical implications there that you have to be careful about. And it's not hard to find policies on that. You can dig around in some of the larger school district websites, and you can, on the larger districts, they've got those policies in place, and it's not hard to find those. But thanks for drawing our attention to that, Kaya and Maria Louise. On the subject of quantitative research, one of my dear friends, he says, you know, if you massage the numbers long enough, they'll say anything you want them to. And I think Archie's correct on that. And we see that a lot of times in many fields, particularly when people have an agenda that they're trying to push one way or the other. They'll take a data set as a result of a study, and they will control for this variable but not for this one, or they'll isolate this variable and not these, and they'll take a data set and basically manipulate it till it says what they want it to say. And so that's one of the reasons that we're dragging you through this course. And it's one of the reasons that I'm trying as hard as I can to get you to be very skeptical, but not cynical, consumers of research. You gotta ask yourself why, what's the motivation? Is the data really saying this, or is that just the conclusion that the author wanted it to say? And so we have to be very critical in that analysis. Week 4, the quantitative part of the show is underway, and most of you are already beginning to do your learning tasks in that regard. There's lots of massaging techniques, as I mentioned to you, and in the quantitative research, there's really a larger array of manipulative tools available. And most of them are statistical tools. I don't give you a great in-depth amount of content on that topic because you'll get it if you really ever decide to conduct a quantitative study, or for those of you that chase a doctorate, you'll have to go through those tools classes. But there are all kinds of statistical tools that we can use to massage that data, the quantitative data. Most of it can be applied with good intention and good motivation, but as I mentioned earlier, sometimes those numbers can be manipulated for nefarious means. Okay. A couple of free book recommendations, then I'll entertain questions from you if you got them. As I've been reading through your work this week, by the way, I'm almost done. I'm almost ready to post your grades for Learning Task 3.2. I've got it almost done. But 2 or 3 books that have come to mind that I think relevant to the things that you all have been saying and the stuff I've been reading from your responses. Dr. Howard Gardner out of Harvard is most widely known for his work on multiple intelligences, and I love that stuff. Anything that Dr. Gardner writes, I will read. But he wrote a very interesting book in 2004 titled Changing Minds, the Art and Science of Changing Our Own and Other People's Minds. And I think that's very relevant to our study of research, because at the end of the day, research is designed to uncover something that we didn't know already, in the interest of seeing whether or not it's useful enough for us to change our practices, change our thinking. It's a very good book. I can highly recommend it. I just finished a book a couple of weeks ago by actually a theater professor from Stanford. Dr. Madsen wrote a book called Improv Wisdom. Don't prepare, just show up. I have, for the last few years, had kind of an interest in improvisational comedy in particular, but mostly reading about the techniques that those improv comedians use to keep the ball rolling, to keep the conversation rolling, and those of you moving into the leadership roles, I think you'll find more and more important. But even those of you that are pursuing your master's in C&I, you're going to find yourself as a department chair or leading teams. And what always where the train runs off the track is when we stop dialogue. So any technique you and I can learn to keep the dialogue moving will be helpful and help inform our work. And then finally, the last book, and I mentioned Changing the Habits of Thinking. Several of you have referenced either being familiar with and having read the works of the late Dr. Stephen Covey around the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And a number of you have mentioned that you're working in schools that actually use a more adolescent version of that work and developing the students, and particularly student leaders. Really, I love all of Dr. Covey's work, and again, I'm a real fan of his. We lost him about 3 years ago to an untimely bicycle death, but in 2004, he wrote a book that I think may have been even better than his book on the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, and the title of that book was The 8th Habit, From Effectiveness to Greatness. If I were going to pick one of his books to read, to recommend to you, that would be the one. And by the way, The 8th Habit The 8th habit is finding your voice and helping other people find theirs. Okay, I'm about out of gas. I'm going to take a look at the chat box. It's open for those of you that got questions. And it looks like I've already got one I'll address. But if you got questions, post them there. I'm going to turn off my notes so I can look at your faces. And I've already put some of you asleep, I can see. No, Dana says she's not asleep. Okay. For the final exam, the ELCC standards can be matched to any LT within that week. For the final exam, the ELCC standards. I'm not sure I understand. Let me take a stab. Thanks, Jennifer. I'm glad you're awake. On the final exam, I think it's part 2 of that thing. I'm going to say I want you to reflect on the 7 weeks of the course, and the learning task or the discussion forum conversation, or anything related to the course that you experienced that you see is most highly aligned to ELCC Standard 1 vision. Tell us what it is. And so you might say, you might specifically cite a piece of content that you read, or you might point to a discussion forum that you read, where we had, or it might be a side conversation that you had with one of the other students along those lines. But any of that stuff qualifies. But what I'm trying to do is get you to ping back against those standards repeatedly, so that when you set for those credentialing exams, they will make sense to you. It should bring that back to mind. Testing week has been long. Yeah, I know, Dana. I think you're in Louisiana, if I remember correctly. I'm in Texas, and I've seen my grandchildren this week. Standardized testing has been a monster here in this state for a number of years. I apologize that we seem to be one of the forerunners, but I can also thankfully report to you that politically we've been able to get that stuff scaled back a little bit to where school can make a little more sense than it did for a good while. Yeah, Jennifer, I remember. You know, right now I'm out in West Texas. By the way, I'm at a track meet where my granddaughter's running, and most of my life has been lived in West Texas. You will have to. Some of you have been out here, I know for a fact, because some of you have worked out here. But we are experiencing one of those days with 40-mile-an-hour winds and a dust storm, which is perfect for track meet, by the way. But it's pretty common. I worked for several years in the Austin area, which was right next to the state education agency. And so when I was a principal of those campuses in the Austin area, when we had testing days, you can be sure that we were drawn up pretty tight, because interestingly, those people from the education agency would always feel the need to go monitor some campuses to see if they were playing by the rules on their testing. And almost always they were going to go visit to campuses that they could get to and get back home by quitting time, which meant the campuses right there in the Austin area. I don't remember those people ever coming out here in the far western plains of Texas to come monitor our testing processes. Good luck, Andrea, on the the credential test. Okay, let's see. I'm looking for other questions. Ask me questions if you got them. I won't belabor it. I'm thankful, by the way, for you all showing up tonight. I know how busy you are. I have not forgotten. Jennifer asked about any other recommendations for databases. The Noel library is great, and the Google Scholar is good. But one that I don't remember any of you mentioning, and I didn't mention it in the syllabus. If you have a public library card, if you're a member of your public library, they almost always have access, free access, to some pretty powerful databases for research on a lot of different topics. But it's scholarly research along a wide variety of topics. So if you have a library card, you probably have access to some, and almost all that now is digital. You don't really have to go down to the library to access stuff as long as you have the magic code, the key to the Magic Kingdom to get in. Ideas for good research topics on collaboration for this week. Dana, my recommendation on the collaboration thing is you can poke around on the concept it's quite often phrased like this, is site-based decision making, which is many state governments and federal government over the last 25 years have become pretty interested in trying to create force environments where people are collaborating. I think the PLC stuff, if you'll hunt and peck down that professional learning community path, you'll find research around the collaboration that you'll find useful there. And then if you'll research in the area of distributed leadership, that's what collaboration is. It's shared leadership or distributed leadership. Way to go, Jim. Good for you, man. Congratulations. Never going to see another poor day now, are you? Oh, wait a minute. You're an educator. I am Catherine, thank you. My granddaughter is a freshman in high school, and she has had a very good day. Mo and I are blessed beyond measure. It's just not, it's not fair for people to have it as good as we have it. Let's see, PLC cycle would be a good search. Agreed, Rebecca? Other questions for me if you got them? Denise, I would not pay for any research. I just don't think it's necessary anymore. In some of those places, some of you have already found them. You know, they want $125 to let you read their article and not even give permission to print it. I'm not doing that. Information there's too much information that's free and accessible. I wouldn't do it. Yeah, Jennifer, you're gonna get a lot of questions, people wanting for you to be research participants, which is not bad. For those of you that ever actually engage in a scholarly study or chase your doctorate, you're going to deal with trying to get access. By the way, at the district level and the campus level, those people that decide whether or not you get to actually do the research, we refer to those as gatekeepers. And sometimes it's pretty hard to get through that gate. It really is. Let me mention this too. You probably figured this out. Of course, I record these videos when I remember, and then I post them the next day. What doesn't get recorded or posted is your questions from the chat box. So anything there, when I turn this meeting off, that's lost. And if any of you have a question that I don't address or I missed, if you'll send it to me, I think you all realize by now that I'm very accessible, and if you send me a question, I'll respond to it. That's not a problem. I'm here to help you. I want you to be successful, and I want you to learn. Okay. I'm looking for a question mark. Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you carving out time. I know how busy you are. I have not forgotten what April and May feel like at the schoolhouse. And I'm also extremely thankful that you are allowing me to learn along with you. Um, I'm a very blessed man in that regard. Thanks for making me a better educator, and thanks for making me a better person. Until next week, um, I will see you then. And as you know, use me as you need me. Good night, all.